MacVoices is supported by iChart Magazine, putting Apple and tech news in focus. Subscribe in iTunes or find out more at iChartMag.com. Welcome to the MacJury on MacVoices. This is the Talk of the Mac community. I'm Chuck Joyner. Folks, we have a great group of guests tonight to talk over Apple in general, what's been happening, all the announcements, the reaction to the announcements, where they stand on products and Apple in general, and the earnings call, and just anything else we can think of to talk about. It should be interesting. As always, let's go around the virtual room and see who you're going to be hearing from. And I always work my screen left to right. That way I can't get too confused. So first up, on that basis, Mr. Josh Centers. Josh, it's great to talk to you.
Thanks for having me back, Chuck.
Yeah, it's been a little while. Have you been hiding under a rock?
Yeah, actually.
Yeah.
In a cave.
What's going on in your world?
Well, I'm still keeping things going at TidBITS, and I'm working on this iOS 8 book, which hopefully should be out any day now.
Great. Well, hopefully we'll be talking to you about that any day now. And he chuckles. Next up, we haven't talked to him for a little while, Mr. Mike Rose. Mike, it's great to have you back, as always.
Always a pleasure, Chuck. Good to see you.
Yeah, we've been trying to connect a couple times, but you just are busy. That's all there is to it.
I've been bouncing around. In addition to everything going on at the Unofficial Apple Weblog, I also have my day job, which you can't see the logo. It's just below camera range here. The Salesforce logo. We just had the big Salesforce conference in San Francisco, Dreamforce, last week. So that was Monday through Thursday of last week. Meant I missed my wife's birthday and my brother's birthday, and it was a big to do. But that soaked up a lot of time. In addition, of course, to day job and night job, I've also recently launched a podcast with everybody's mutual friend and colleague Kelly Guimont. Who she and I are now the co-hosts of the Aftershow. We had been co-hosts on the Unofficial Apple Weblog Sunday night talkcast for many years. That show ran for over 7 years. And when that ended recently, she and I decided that it was too soon to say goodnight. So we took our after show that we would occasionally do after the 10 o'clock to 11 o'clock hour on Sundays, and we've now made it a standalone podcast at aftershowpodcast.com. So check it out.
Great. I will. On the subject of missing your wife and brother's birthday, I see the black eyes have healed nicely.
Yes. You can't see the broken legs, the kneecapping, but the doctors say I should be fine in 6 to 8 months. So that's I look forward to that. That's
good. Hopefully you attempted to make up with it for it with jewelry.
I sent flowers and gin, actually.
Okay.
I got a lovely text from my wife saying this is an awesome birthday present because I sent her a half a case of artisanal gin, which was my way of saying, I know I drive you to drink. If I'm going to drive you to drink, I might as well drive you to some good drink. So that was my choice.
I'll send you my birthday after the
That's
the
right.
show.
We'll talk after.
Yeah. Last but absolutely not least, and for her first time on the MacJury, Nat Osten. Nat, it's great to have you. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Yeah, we've been trying to connect for a while, and it seems like every time I'd decide to invite you, I'd look at your Twitter stream and I'd find out that you're out of town doing something else. And so I'd say, okay, next time. So I finally caught you where you're supposed to be, right here with us.
Yeah, it's good to be here. Things with App Camper are coming down anyway, and stuff's going good with Smile. But I'm working on getting an app out with all the kids' work for the summer. So that's had me staying at home and not going out so that I can get that done so everybody can see what we've been working on.
So do you bounce? Let's see, is it Portland? Yeah, Portland for App Camp for Girls. Are you traveling to there, or you're not based out of there, are you?
I'm based out of Portland.
Are you? Okay.
Yeah, but I've spent time in Seattle, San Francisco, and then going back home to Florida, which is where my mom lives.
Okay. So you're just bouncing all over the place all the time. No wonder I can't catch you.
Yeah, I don't like staying put for too long.
Yeah. And what is your primary responsibility at Smile? What are you coding for?
I'm an iOS developer, and my primary responsibility is Scan Plus.
Great. So we have you to thank for that.
Yep.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
It's a great app. It's a great app.
Thanks.
So, guys, as I said in the intro, it just seems like there's so much stuff going on in the Apple universe, you almost don't know where to start. So I figured we'd kind of kick off with the Apple event that announced the iPad Air 2, the iPad Mini 3, the 5K Retina Mac, the new Mac Mini, and kind of go from there. And more than, I guess, just the reaction to the products, because probably everybody's seen and read those by now, I'm curious about your reaction to the reactions. Some people have been super enthusiastic and felt this was a great event. Others seem to have just been yawning through it, which I personally don't agree with. Of course, there's been a lot of analysis of the whole comedy aspect that seemed to be so prevalent here. So, Mike, how about if I start with you in the middle? Any thoughts on any of this, good, bad, or indifferent?
You know, I think that it's almost hard to fathom the amount of effort that went into Apple's autumn product lineup, because you're looking at iOS 8 being released, Yosemite being released, Apple Pay, the introduction, although not the on sale date, of the Apple Watch, and the 6, the 6 Plus, the iPad Mini 3, the iPad Air 2, the new iMac, the new Mini. I mean, just in the space of 30, 40 days, you're talking about almost a complete refresh, with the exception of the MacBook Pro and Mac and Air. And oh, by the way, if you were watching that keynote, you may have noticed that the Mac Pro did not make an appearance even in the Mac family lineup, which if I were the Mac Pro, I would have been personally upset. Although someone did say it was there, you just couldn't see it because, you know, it's so black that it was in the background and just was invisible. I mean, my primary reaction was to look at that product announcement, the later one, and think, wow, this is a company that is not sitting on its laurels. It, particularly knowing as Tim Cook did, with the earnings call coming up with just a few days later, knowing that the Mac had an incredible blowout quarter. 1 million more Macs sold year over year, getting over 5 million Macs sold in the quarter versus about 4.4 the year before. Knowing that the Mac is doing so fantastic, and knowing that the iPad is struggling a little bit, but you know what? It's a product where, as Tim Cook said in the earnings call, they don't know the replacement cycle on it yet. It's not a phone. It's not a laptop. They really don't know how quickly people are going to buy new ones. I looked at that announcement and I said, if you're going to put out a product like the 5K Retina iMac, and say, here is our $2,500 desktop. Boom. You know, everyone else is selling PCs as loss leaders. Everyone else is selling $400 desktops and $300 laptops. Nobody can figure out a way to make money in this industry. Apple's going to say, we have a $2,500 all-in-one, and we will not be able to make them fast enough. We are going to sell a ton of these. And by the way, they're as powerful basically as our top of the line desktop. If you were to buy this screen alone, it would cost you $2,200. So we're basically giving you this computer for free. It's a gut move. Whether or not people believe it's a necessary product, I think it's a very impressive product. It says something about what Apple considers its customers. How is that sentence going to end? Who Apple considers its customers to be, which is people who are willing to spend money on technology at the margins, people who are willing to invest in something that is better than what they could get anywhere else. And when Kelly and I talked about this last week on the show, her position was people who care about mismatched equipment. Like this person for whom a Mac Pro with a Dell 4K display is simply not right, that they have to have everything the way they want it. So I think it was a great autumn of product announcements. And for people who think this is a company that isn't innovating or isn't driving the market forward, I'm not sure what they're looking at.
Okay. Nat, how about your reaction to this? Mike brought up a lot of things I want to follow up on. How do you feel about the iMac 5K, which has seemed to, at least it's become my unofficial title. I don't know what the proper title is.
I like that title.
Yeah. Is it, and you're an iOS developer, so what was your reaction to it?
I mean, I'm super excited about it. I've been wanting a high-res desktop machine for a long time. And the point that you brought up about having mismatched equipment, it drives me nuts. I want my desk to have the same visual standards as the apps that I use. It's super important. And I have an ancient, super crummy old display that's just been sitting in my closet because it's too ugly for me to put on my desk. Anyway, but I've been waiting to update and actually get an iMac to, because I wanted to have a higher res display. So anyway, I'm super happy. I'm really excited about it. And I may have read this incorrectly, but some of the benchmark stuff that I had read said that it competed with the Mac Pro, and that might be completely wrong. But I thought that was impressive that Apple also said, like, we're going to put enough power into it. We're not going to cripple it, unlike, what they've done with things like the iPad or the iPad mini. I'm disappointed that they didn't bring that as far forward.
Yeah. Josh, we've heard Apple executives now for months saying that they were approaching the strongest product lineup they've ever seen. Do you think that these announcements, and now we're pretty much finished with them, live up to that hype?
It's such a mixed bag. On one hand, you have the Retina iMac, which is such an amazing product and such an amazing Mac. And really, I think if you look at Apple's sales numbers, and a lot of people were surprised by how well the Mac is doing, but I wasn't terribly surprised because they've been shipping some amazing Macs lately. The Retina screens, this new Retina iMac, I think is going to be huge. Meanwhile, the iPad's kind of boring. There's just nothing really exciting going on there. There's no fireworks. Touch ID is cool. I wish I had Touch ID in my iPad Air, but I'm not going to spend another $500-$600 for that. It's just not that interesting. And frankly, the iPad Mini 3 is a huge disappointment. It's the same thing as last year with Touch ID. And I also think that kind of indicates that Apple thinks they made a mistake last year by making the Air and the Mini equals, because I think everyone just went for the Mini. And if I have one criticism of Tim Cook's Apple, it's that you can see a lot of very transparent business decisions, such as staying with 16 gigabytes for the starting storage size and then jumping to 64. That's a very clear business decision. There's nothing that makes logical sense about that technologically. Same thing with the hobbling of the iPad Mini. That doesn't really make any sense compared to last year. Well, hobbling may be a harsh word, but holding it back, shall we say. But overall, I like the direction Apple's going. I do think they have a very strong product line, and arguably the strongest product line they've ever had. But it is still a bit of a mixed bag. But hey, nothing's perfect.
Wow. Okay, everybody, jump on Josh.
No, he saw my face when he said hobbling, and that was, yeah. I don't know that the fact that the iPad Mini just got Touch ID in gold is a fair criticism, because it wasn't necessarily scheduled for a major refresh. It just got the Retina, it just got the improved processor. The fact that it didn't get the A8X, or didn't get the enhanced graphics subsystem, we saw a huge amount of engineering refresh in the past 30 days. So something's got to give, and maybe what gave was the Mini. And also, you are dealing with a smaller package, a smaller form factor. I did say smaller package on your show, Scott. Chuck, I'm sorry.
Chuck,
I know
Chuck.
I know I promised I would never say that while confusing your name with 5 other people. But the Mini is a smaller form factor device, and there are potentially power issues, thermal issues, and other reasons why you can't immediately just say this is going to be identical to its bigger sibling. However, I will go as far as disappointing. I will go as far as it would be nice to see a bit more in the Mini than just Touch ID and a fresh coat of paint. All that said, the most interesting piece of pushback on the 16 gig thing that I've seen, while I agree with you that it's a business decision, I think it's possible that the reason that 16 gig SKU is there is for schools. It's for bulk purchasers in education who say, I don't actually need more than that amount of space. Every single dollar I spend is critical. Those are, then again, probably the same people who are still buying the iPad 2 and the original iPad Mini. But I thought that was at least a reasonably persuasive argument. In general, yeah, it should be 32. even though Apple moving its base SKU to 32 gig would have a massive impact on the world flash market, Apple buys so much flash RAM at this point that it has a lot of market gravity. But yeah, I mean, I'm not disagreeing with Josh and jumping on him entirely. I'm just disagreeing with him lightly.
Nat, do you want to jump on Josh before I attack him?
I want to jump on the idea that maybe the iPad mini didn't get a better update because of some sort of, additional thermal concerns with it being smaller. They put way more power in the phones and they work just fine. So I don't really think that computes.
That may not compute. I mean, my phone gets really hot in my pocket, but then again,
but you're not going to put the iPad mini in your pocket.
I have extremely large pockets. No, no, I'm not.
Do you wear Jinko jeans from the 90s?
I do. Only one time, and it was on a dare. But, okay, so, but I mean, just in terms of engineering the device, whether it's thermal or whether it's another reason, Apple could have potentially put that faster CPU and the faster hardware into the mini, and I guess what Josh's original point is that not doing so represents more of a business differentiation between the devices than a real reason. There's some real technical reason not to do it. Is that fair, Nat and Josh?
Yeah.
Here's the thing. Let me elaborate a little bit. The problem is, I mean, I think Apple's always done stuff like this, and we bought it because they presented a compelling narrative. But the problem is, when they put the Air and the Mini on equal footing last year, they raised the curtain. You could see behind the stage. You see, oh, they can be the same product, just at different price points and screen sizes. And this year, they're trying to go back to the original narrative of, well, the Mini is a cheaper product and it doesn't have as much power to it, and you can't shut that box, and I think that's why people are so disappointed with it.
Well, and just because you want a small package doesn't mean you don't want the power.
I've got everybody talking about small packages now.
Yeah. I had to say it again.
Yeah.
My mission is complete.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, I think there is a certain disappointment factor to the Mini. I was really intrigued to see that they took that step. And Mike, I think you brought up an interesting point as far as the RAM. I have to wonder if maybe there's also an issue with the chipset itself. The A8X. That maybe they couldn't produce enough of those. They knew that there was going to be a lot of demand for the Air 2. And so did they make a decision intentionally to go that way and let that be the iPad Mini 3 when the time comes?
That's possible. I mean, we don't 4. iPad Mini 4, yeah, iPad Mini 2 Plus.
Yeah.
We don't have the kind of transparency into Apple's supply chain that we would like, particularly for the SoCs, because Apple does produce those. Apple owns the production process for those to a larger degree than it does for some of the more commodity components that it uses. So if Apple were to even tell us, Apple would never tell us we're constrained on the A8X. We're not going to find that out. But you could infer, as you just did, one could infer that new processor is constrained by the fact that it's only showing up in a single one product. It's only showing up in the iPad Air 2, not in the presumably extremely popular Mini 3, not in the 6 or 6 Plus, which just got released. So yeah, I mean, it is possible to look at this as a callous business decision. It's possible to look at it as a savvy, market alignment move, and it's possible to look at it as a resource management move. We just don't necessarily have enough information to decide which of those it is, and I guess it depends on where you sit and what color your glasses are, and whether you think Tim Cook is evil or indifferent or misunderstood.
Whoa.
I've had a long day.
Yeah, really. Natalie,
it got deep really quick.
It did. It got a little deep.
Yeah. Nat, I haven't heard anybody call Tim Cook evil except for Mike just now. Which
Darth Cook.
Yeah, Darth Cook. which is a really interesting perspective. But
I can just imagine that Bloomberg cover, except with the cursive, except it says Darth Cook.
Yes. the other thing I wanted to jump on Josh, and Nat, I'll let you jump on him with me, and or maybe you won't. I don't know, but it sounded like Josh made an inference that making a business decision is a bad thing. And I'm not sure that's a characteristic of Tim Cook's Apple. I think that may be a characteristic of Apple in 2014, because the landscape around them looks a lot different. They have a lot more competitors trying to infringe on their particular territory, meaning tablets, smartphones, and all, than they have for quite some time. It's been ramping up, and so I have to wonder if they're having to make some business decisions to fight on that basis.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think that that's the motivation for keeping around older products for longer periods of time. We've traditionally seen, other than for education purposes, when something gets replaced, it's gone. And the further along we get, the older iPads are still available. They did a minor update to the 5S to make it the 5, or what is it? The 5 to make it the 5C. But I think that they're realizing that, we have to cater to people who are going to pay that lower price point, and in some cases that means making sacrifices, like keeping a 16 gigabyte iPad around, or something with an older processor. As a developer, I find it really frustrating because people's experiences lack. They're not good because things are slow and they don't work the way they could. And I think people don't realize whenever they buy the free one or the cheap one that, their performance and their experience is suffering. And I think that we should be able to, in an ideal world, look to Apple to say, you know what, nope, we're going to take that away from you. You can't buy it anymore. And so them not doing that is just super disappointing to me.
From the developer's perspective, because I'm honestly not sure. Will the iPad run the iPad Mini, the bottom end one, still run iOS 8?
Oh yeah, yep. I've got one on my coffee table right now. With
iPad 2 still runs it.
Okay.
And those two devices are essentially equivalent. The non-Retina Mini and the iPad 2 are the same.
Right. So I guess my question becomes, other than speed and other than maybe for some graphics heavy applications, is the performance difference that bad? And I know, okay, games and graphics, let's just put those in a class by themselves. But overall, is it an unacceptable thing, or is it a motivator to buy up the chain to get a little faster iPad that will give you a better experience?
Yeah, I think really the question isn't really, is it at an unacceptable level? The problem is when people run into that problem, when it does slow down. They're going to blame the device and think that it's broken, not that they need a new one. And that was my experience at the Genius Bar way back in the day before I was a developer. I was a technician at the Genius Bar, and without fail, like when it slowed down, people thought that it was broken. They didn't think that they had an old device that needed to be replaced.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, and so people lose faith in the product. Instead of just thinking, oh, gee, this is 4 years old, I should buy a new one. And that got even worse whenever they were leaving the previous model iPhone around. Because people are like, what do you mean? I just bought it 6 months ago. Why is it so slow? And it's like, well, you bought 2-year-old hardware and then you put the latest OS on it and you're expecting it to do all the tricks that all the new things do, and it just doesn't work.
Yeah. Well, they shouldn't be. Normal people shouldn't be expected to keep up with all the tech publications. You go in the store, you buy a new iPad. It should be new. It shouldn't be old and worn out already by the time you buy it. The one thing I do want to clarify, Mr. Joyner, I am not a communist. I'm not opposed to business decisions. I think it's great. I think it's one of the things. On one hand, Tim Cook's doing it really well. I think the problem is the transparency of it, because part of Apple's marketing, part of Apple's pastiche has always been they trick people into thinking they're a charity, and they've done this for a really long time. And Steve Jobs was really good at it. But when they start doing things that are just really obviously trying to get you to upgrade to the next level, I think that's the mistake. I think making it blatantly obvious is the mistake. So just wanted to clarify that point too.
Are you now, or have you ever been,
Yes.
a member of the anti-Tim Cook Communist Party?
I'm a huge Cook fan, actually.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, Chuck. Go ahead.
So Chairman Centers.
Honeycrisp.
Yeah, comrade. Thank you. That's better. Comrade. No, I hear what you're saying, and I guess I'm encouraged because I see it as a way for people at a lower price point to put Apple technology in their hands. It may not be the best experience, but I think it's got to be a good experience. Now, that's where we may have the breakdown in the difference of opinion. Is the experience good, or is it good enough, or is it, as Nat said, a negative experience, so that people will say, well, gee, I'm not going to necessarily buy up the iPad chain. I may go over here and check out an Android tablet.
Yeah, I don't think that that's a way to create customers that are going to stick around. I mean, either they're going to buy it and they're going to have a poor experience because it doesn't do everything that it should, or they're going to buy it, but they're always going to buy the lowest, cheapest thing. And either way, are those good customers? That sounds terrible to say, but...
Well, I mean, I would look at the current iPad lineup and say the differential between the iPad, let's say the Retina, the original Retina, which is the lowest priced iPad right now, I think at $249, and the lowest price current gen, which would be or not quite current gen, but the lowest priced just introduced, which is the Mini Retina 2, which is $399. You're talking about $150 differential. And a tablet, the people that are buying the older one, I think are probably buying it for grandma, or they're buying it for a young kid, or they're buying it for a specific purpose. Like, this is my e-reader, or this is my browsing device, or this is my gigantic iPod. And I'll tell you that the original Mini that I have, 16 gig original Mini, is perfectly serviceable as a Safari device, as a newsreader, as a Kindle app device, and as a video player. It's spectacular. It works great. I've actually been watching the iTunes Festival concerts from last month on a 16 gig Mini. They're streaming. I don't worry about the storage amounts. The Wi-Fi works fine. There's nothing wrong with the device. Just like there's nothing wrong with a 2-year-old Kindle. There's nothing wrong with a Nexus 7. They're all perfectly serviceable. It's just that we have expectations of them behaving like the new stuff we might buy, number one, or that naive customers might expect that. And number two, they may or may not react well to the latest iOS. I will say that iOS 8.1 on that device, which is probably the oldest device I have in current use that I touch every day, has been great. I mean, it has not been laggy. It hasn't shown me anything like the 6 to 7 transition, which was wicked painful on the low end of the supported range for that OS. iOS 6 to 7 hurt and did, I think, what Nat was describing, that people coming in and saying, why is it slow? That was a very common experience around then. Despite the low adoption rate for 8, which is, I think, more a reaction to the media reports of bugs with 8.0, 8.02 and 8.1 performance-wise have actually been pretty good. They haven't seemed to be... I think Apple has learned a little bit about degrading gracefully as it's had more and more ranges of hardware to support iOS on. And this to me feels like a pretty well-engineered release from the perspective of, let's look at the long tail of hardware we have to support.
I will give you that. The lower end devices that I do testing on every day definitely work better than the previous OS updates have on the low end stuff.
I think one thing that factors into all this from the consumer, I hate that word, from the customer standpoint is, what other kind of product category do you have to keep rebuying or are expected to rebuy every year, every other year, every few years? Not that many things, really. You buy a fridge, it'll probably last 10 years. You buy a water heater, 10 years. TV, 5 to 10 years. Cast iron skillet, well, you can pass it down to your great-great-grandkids. I want the cast iron skillet of phones. I get tired of buying new phones all the time. I just want to buy the one phone and have it for 10 years. That's probably not realistic. That probably would not be a good business decision for Apple. But I think people just get tired of the disposable culture. just I think a lot of people want that one thing you buy and then you're done with it, because buying things is stressful. Setting up a new device is stressful, and it gets old after a while. Even for someone like me who loves technology, I would have been perfectly happy with my iPhone 5. I got the 6 for testing Touch ID, things like that, to do my job. But I was fine with the iPhone 5. It did what I needed. Didn't really need anything newer. I don't know how you guys feel about that, but I think that's a common sentiment in the circles of the muggles.
Josh, that's an interesting point, and I think you're spot on for a lot of people. I think the question becomes, what are you the most unhappy about with whatever your current device is, Mac, iPhone, iPad, whatever, and what have they done to improve it? If you're right, if you were happy with the 5, as I recall, I didn't see anything saying the 5 stopped working. It just, they're better cameras, faster processors, and then there are people like Nat that, do sexy new things with the software that maybe your phone isn't quite up to. So if you're okay not doing that, that's fine. But if you want to do some of the other stuff, then you have to upgrade. Right.
Well, actually, my 5, the camera died on it about a week before I got my 6, so I was kind of that helped push me along anyway. But I mean, it's a constant upgrade cycle in tech, and part of me just philosophically wonders if we'll ever reach a point in computing where we're like, we've reached enough computing. This is fine enough. I think we've reached that in desktops, laptops, more or less. I mean, there's still frontiers there, but you're not doing a lot of really neat, cool, sexy stuff on the desktop anymore. Just, that might change a little bit with Yosemite. With Windows 10, but most of the exciting stuff's on mobile. I just wonder if we're going to get to a point where or even like what's happened with PCs. Most people, I would say, probably keep a PC for 5 years now, if not longer. I wonder when we'll reach that point with phones and how soon. I'm guessing probably in a couple of generations, a couple of years, we'll start seeing more of that, because even the iPhone 6, there was nothing really just mind-blowing about it. Like, okay, you have a larger screen, faster processor, and now it's at the point where Apple's starting to get into the speeds and feeds thing again, like we saw with PCs in the 90s. Even though they're kind of shy about talking about RAM, about talking about processor, but they still do, and they still push it. And even on the the iPhone 6 commercials, they talk about all these cool things with the camera, like the camera is more stable and it looks sharper. You don't have to put that in numbers per se, but it's the same thing as last year, just better, which is the same philosophy. So I'm wondering if we're reaching a plateau with innovation in mobile hardware.
I wonder with that, people have a different catalyst for buying new mobile devices, though, specifically phones. Your computer sits on your desk, or maybe your laptop travels with you a bunch, but people drop their phones, they get them wet, they break them, and that instigates, the decision to buy another one. So at least with most of my friends that aren't, interested in having the latest, greatest, fastest phone, usually, they'll drop it or something, they'll break it, and then they'll go buy a new one. And there's nothing more disappointing than, dropping your phone in the toilet and then going and buying the exact same thing again. If you're going to have to do it, you at least want it to be something new. So I kind of wonder if that sort of forced upgrade pattern, just due to people breaking them, will help drive, the innovation forward a little bit quicker.
It might. And someone is printing here, so I apologize. This is one of the perils of recording in an office with a household full of children. So I'll be sure to show this to everybody as soon as it prints out. It's bound to be an interesting piece of homework. But this, you can't really fix it in post. It's just going to print. The replacement cycle on phones and the replacement cycle on PCs is an open challenge to the industry, and as Tim Cook discussed in the earnings call, the replacement cycle on tablets really hasn't been figured out yet. Nobody knows what the replacement cycle on printers is going to be about 2 seconds from now when I smack this one out of the room. By the way, I should point out the device that is making all this noise right now is an HP PSC 2175, which is at least 8 years old. And I tried to replace it, and the device I tried to replace it with broke, 3 days after I got it. So I'm still using that same 8 or 9 year old printer because it keeps on going. Meanwhile, the iMac that I have, which is a 2011 iMac, I just had to take in for new thermal paste and an SSD got put in, and it's like having a new machine, but I had to invest money to bring that machine up to current spec. All that aside, we don't really know what the tablet refresh cycle is, but it's also, I think, fair to respond to Josh by saying we don't really know what the driver for the next generation of devices is going to be. And when you say what is good enough technology when it comes to consumer technology, you're talking about a category that effectively didn't exist 7 years ago. I mean, smartphones as we know them were not a consumer category 7 years ago. So you're talking, and now you're saying we're at the end of history when it comes to phones.
Well, it's into history. I just think that the current iteration of things is plateauing.
Well, which may be true, but then you look at things like Oculus and other sort of alternative ways in which we might interact with these devices, and you look at the Apple Watch and say, well, now we have a multi-dimensional touch and magic crown or digital crown or crown of watch, whatever they're calling that. The thing on the side.
Digital crown.
Digital crown.
Yeah.
I for some reason, I always think of Burger King when they say that. I don't know why. But I
think it's Johnny Ive strutting around with a crown on his
giant crown. I am the digital king.
It's made of aluminium.
It's made of pure titanium and aluminium. But we're seeing these multimodal interfaces. We're seeing new things coming along, and I think that the way to figure out what the next to the power of 2 iPhone is going to do is to look at what things did Apple's competitors try and fail at from a UI or UX perspective a generation back. Touch ID, you can look 2 generations back to a Motorola phone, to the Atrix, and it's like, well, they had a fingerprint reader, but it sucked. And now Apple's done it and it works. You can look at you could look at touch devices prior to the iPhone and say, well, everybody had them, but they weren't any good. And then Apple did it and it worked. So look at 3D, look at the haptic interfaces, look at all the stuff that we know Apple has patents on and is working on. And we know other people have tried. LG made the 3D phone, and other people have the glasses-free 3D interfaces and the Minority Report-esque stuff. All those things are happening, but nobody's done them right. So when a company, presumptively Apple, maybe someone else, but when a company goes and says, we took this technology, we made it easy to use, and we made it so sexy that you cannot help but pull out your wallet, that's your replacement cycle.
I also, I guess, Josh, I'm not sure I agree with you on the speed thing. It wasn't long. Well, how many times has it been that, gee, how will I ever use all these cycles? I mean, I think
all this RAM. Yeah,
what was it? The Mac 2 FX was wicked fast. I mean, how far back is that? I think it's a situation where once you get all these cycles to work with, the software designers say, hey, something that I couldn't do 2 years ago, 5 years ago, suddenly becomes very viable. Now a big question becomes, how does that translate down to the what was your word, customer, or the average? I'll use the word consumer. Certainly video professionals will take all the power they can get. There are other professional applications that need that kind of horsepower. But what can you do with that kind of horsepower to improve the average computer user's life? I think that's a really interesting question that we're starting to examine with the mobile devices. I think we've kind of gotten away from it on the desktop, and I'm hoping we'll get back to it.
Well, you never know. You never know what the future is going to hold. I just, the pattern I've seen, the pattern I'm looking at. I'm not saying computing is just going to stop dead in its tracks. It's just like any other kind of evolution. The Stegosaurus dies out or it plateaus, and then along come furry little mammals. I mean, we're seeing that now. You're gonna get email about that. The desktop kind of got boring. I mean, Apple's doing some cool stuff there. High res displays, but it's nothing. It's not like it was in the 90s, right? And just like phones are starting to get kind of boring, and tablets are kind of starting to get boring. So here comes the watches, here comes the wearables. That's just capitalism at work, because no matter what, Apple, Samsung, all these guys, all these not to be a sexist, all these companies are trying to, they have to keep thinking of stuff for you to buy. They'll probably still keep selling PCs forever because developers need them. There's no Xcode for iPad yet. Sadly, that's a long way off, probably, if ever. So, but they still have to keep getting you to buy new crap, and so they have to keep coming up with new categories and new things to get you to part with your money. And so that's what keeps it interesting, though. Because I mean, if we were just talking about phones 20 years from now, that would be incredibly boring.
Well, unless your phone can do something really, really amazing that we can only imagine, or that we haven't even thought about right now. I mean,
right, but it may not even resemble a phone. That's my point.
Yeah.
Hey, now you can use your desktop PC as a phone. And
yeah, that's true. That's true. MacVoices is supported by iChart Magazine, putting Apple and tech news in focus. Ken Ray, the brains behind macOS Ken, brings you iChart Magazine, a digital-only publication distributed through Apple's newsstand, where he delivers more in-depth coverage on the Apple news we all crave. Published Monday through Friday, it's the perfect way to get more of Ken's views and analysis on what makes the Apple universe tick. Of course, Ken doesn't stop there. He also covers tech news in general, but with an eye on how it affects you and me as Apple users and enthusiasts. And that's the difference. The iChart Magazine difference. Ken was my guest on MacVoices 14198 to talk about iChart Magazine, along with macOS Ken, iChart Radio, Day 6, and what keeps him going. Ken is one of my favorite Apple News junkies because of his unique combination of analysis and wit. iChart Magazine is your way to get his most in-depth coverage of our favorite computer company and everything that affects them. iChart Magazine, putting Apple and tech news in focus. Find out more and subscribe in iTunes and at iChartMag.com. Thanks to iChart Magazine for their support of MacVoices. I want to shift things a little bit because we could keep on going with this for a while, but I want to go back to Nat's comment about how much she's apparently lusting after the 5K iMac, and the idea that this is challenging, at least for some people, the power of the Mac Pro. From what I've read, the Mac Pro the video people are still love it because it's got all those cores to work with, but a lot of people on the desktop are saying, gee, the iMac 5K is plenty powerful for what I need. So how do you all feel about, the posturing of those two products and maybe even the competition between the two? And Nat, how about if I turn to you since you're the one with lust in your heart for that new machine?
Yeah, I guess I wasn't that surprised. There was a point in time a little while back where, once again, the iMac had, better specs all around than the Mac Pro, and it sort of got left by the wayside. I did kind of have some hopes whenever they announced the Mac Pro and, the whole redesign and just the way that they unveiled it, that it was going to be this sort of holy mecca of awesome that, none of the other product line was going to argue with. But, they did it once, they'll do it again. It's not really that surprising. So I think, there's the thing about it that's disappointing is that if you've got one thing on your desk that does all the same things as, a tower that you have to plug a bunch of stuff into, where's the benefit? And in my mind, there's really no reason to buy a Pro now. And I just wonder why. Why did they do it like that? On the other hand, I really appreciate, the fact that they put that much power into the iMac. That makes me excited as somebody who would, consider buying it. So,
Mike, any thoughts on the parity?
I think that the why question is always an interesting one, and in this case, there are some ecosystem and architectural reasons why the Pro is what it is versus what the iMac being what it is. The Pro has to use the server class processors, the Xeon style processors, in order to give you those multi-chip, multi-core, 12 cores, 16 cores. You can't do that with the Haswell processors. or at least my understanding is you can't do that with the Haswell processor. So if you're going to deliver a really massively parallel machine for scientific computing, for video editing, for rendering, and so forth, the only way to do it is with those Xeon class processors. Unfortunately, Intel's roadmap is what controls here. Apple cannot drive Intel's processor development in a direction Intel doesn't want to go. So if Intel doesn't have, I think it's Broadwell is the next generation of the Xeons. Josh, am I making stuff up or
what was that now? Xeons?
Is Broadwell the next generation, the anticipated generation? Right.
Yes.
So if those aren't here yet, there's no way to put the Mac Pro on a faster footing than what it's on, while delivering that massively multi-core machine. Meanwhile, the iMac can use the desktop class processors as opposed to the server class processors, and can be driven really, really fast. And obviously you need a really fast processor, you need a really fast GPU, you need an incredible system bandwidth, backplane bandwidth, and you need really fast RAM to drive that screen. You have to have it. So there would be no point in taking last year's iMac and putting it behind that screen. It wouldn't run. They had to push the envelope. They had to move all those subsystems further along. And the result is delivering a machine that in single core performance is going to compare very favorably with the more expensive system-wide Mac Pro. It just is what it is. And I think a lot of people who might have considered a Mac Pro before the 5K Retina are not thinking about it now. There are still those people who need a Mac Pro because they need multi-core. That's what they need. And they need 6 Thunderbolt ports, and they need to be able to run 2 4K displays. None of which are things you could do with the iMac, but that's a very, very small slice of the market. That hence the term Pro. It's not for developers. I mean, it's not intended, Nat, for you.
I definitely don't think the Mac Pro is intended for a user like myself.
Yeah, but the iMac, heck yes.
Yeah.
Even though the iMac, by the time you kit it out, I was testing with the build to order stuff today, and you could get it up to like $37.99. Without going SSD, still with the 3 terabyte Fusion drive, and the faster processor, more RAM, more and the higher end GPU. I would love that machine. I mean, I would love that machine, but I don't use the iMac I'm sitting in front of right now. I don't use it enough to justify. I barely use it enough to justify the upgrades I just put into it of $600. But I would love if I tripped over a savings bond. I would love a new iMac.
How do you want to trip over a savings bond?
They're very flat.
And then you land in a face full of gold, and that really hurts. Yeah. It's not as fun as Scrooge makes it look.
I mugged a leprechaun, and
You gotta be careful, though. They're feistier than they look.
They are. Yeah. They punch above their weight, as they say.
Yeah, and below your waist.
There's a theme going tonight here that is not a good one. Josh, thoughts on the iMac 5K and where it fits, especially since you're the one saying that you feel like things are a little less interesting less interesting across the board, other than just being a gorgeous display and a fast machine. Does this excite you at all in any way?
Totally. Yeah, the Retina iMac 5K with whatever they're calling it now, it's the most exciting thing I've seen out of Apple this year. I'm more excited about it than I am the watch. I mean, it's just I cannot wait to see one in person. It makes me giddy. So I'm not completely and totally cynical. Actually, the first blog post that kind of got me recognized in the Mac tech world was a speculative post I had about I was saying that I thought the next Mac Pro would be a Retina iMac, and while that was totally wrong, in some ways I think in some ways I was right, because I think the Retina iMac is, for most pros, the true professional Macintosh, because like I'm a pro, I use a Mac. I don't really need a Mac Pro. The Mac Pro should almost be called like Mac Dump Truck or Mac Scientific or Mac video editing, because it's a very small slice of even the professional market that needs its very specific capabilities. I think for developers, for writers, for editors, musicians even, I think the Retina iMac is totally the way to go. I pulled up a post from Marco Arment here, the developer. Everyone knows who Marco is. And, from here, Geekbench says that the 4-core Retina iMac is 25% faster than the 6-core Mac Pro in single-threaded tasks, which for most people, that covers a lot of things. When you're a developer, well, developers use multi-core a lot, but most users are going to use single or just a few cores. They're not going to take advantage of a full 6 cores that often. So I think for most people, this is going to be a faster machine. It's going to be it's going to take up less of a footprint on their desk. It's going to be easier on the eyes. It's going to be nicer to look at. It's going to have less cable mess. I mean, it's cool you can connect 300 things to a Mac Pro, but I mean, who has a grudge for that? So yeah, I think for most professionals, for most users, the iMac Pro 5K with Retina, they really need to start name these things better. But the Retina iMac is the way to go. It is the lust-worthy iMac.
Okay, I think I've heard 2 out of the 3 of you say this, and I take a little exception to it, just like I did when the Mac Pro first came out. Everybody's kind of complaining about, well, you got to plug this into the Mac Pro, that into the Mac Pro. You got to plug it into the iMac too. I mean,
well, I don't think first of all, you don't have to plug the monitor into the iMac, which is a big thing.
All right, I'll give you that one.
And secondly, I don't think we're complaining about it. I just think that it's not a relative advantage. Like, having the Mac Pro, it used to be that the Mac Pro was a highly expandable, internally expandable machine. So you could throw a bunch of drives in there, you could throw cards in there, you could throw a bunch of stuff. Now the Mac Pro is an artillery shell with a lot of moss hanging off of it. And you can't, it's a colorful image, I grant you, but but to Josh's point, it is the specialist. It is really targeted at a very few pieces of the market, and it has to connect to a bunch of stuff in order to be particularly useful. And the iMac, I mean, lustworthy is not too strong a word. I think when people start seeing this machine in the stores, they're going to flip their lids. And it is, I love the comparison between the original iMac 128K screen, pixel for pixel, versus the Retina iMac screen, which is a great visual. If you haven't seen it, you can look it up. But I hadn't read the guy's commentary on the guy who came up with that visual. I hadn't read his commentary, and he pointed out that for list price, they're almost exactly the same. The 128K Mac was $24.95, and the iMac is $24.99. Although adjusted for inflation, that original 128K Mac is closer to between $5,000 and $6,000 in today's dollars. That was a huge purchase back then for that tiny little beast. And now you get a movie theater quality production studio on your desktop that's less than an inch thick, and it costs $2,500. That's a lot of progress in 30 years.
It's a lot of progress and a lot of power. And I'm not convinced that there aren't opportunities out here to educate people and to make that power more usable and more applicable to what they do. I'm not sure you can ever speed up. I don't know that you need this machine to do web surfing and email, but I think there are a lot of things that we all could benefit from this. Let me try that again. That you could use this power and genuinely benefit from if you do a little bit of learning and a little bit of maybe rethinking what it is you're trying to accomplish. I don't know, Josh, you were saying that you're excited over this. Again, I go to you. With what you do, can you see, other than it just being a gorgeous screen, can you see it really genuinely enhancing your productivity?
Oh, but the only excuse I need is the screen. If I could afford this thing, I would already have one. I could technically afford it. I just don't want to spend that much money on a computer. But I mean that level of sharpness, that level of clarity. I mean, I stare at that screen 18 hours a day between TidBITS in the book and whatever computery things I do. Like this is where I live. This is my home right here. This little box I'm in right now, like this is pretty much all I see all day. So The two investments I would love to make are a humongous Retina display and a much better chair. This chair is terrible. I'll get for $100 from Staples, but I digress. But yeah, if I had like just $10,000 to blow, yeah, I would totally buy like a super high end chair and one of these maxed out iMacs. Absolutely, just for the screen. I mean, you have to have enough hardware to power that screen anyway. I would be afraid, even with the base GPU, that it would lag. And that's why I wrote in TidBITS, if you're a professional looking into this iMac, spend the $250, get as much GPU as you can, because this thing's going to take a lot of juice, and I'm sure it's probably going to struggle at times.
Nat, let's go back to something you said earlier about the matched hardware and all, which I think is really interesting, especially given Apple's apparent new focus or revised focus on fashion. And that takes us into Apple Watch territory. But are we seeing that same kind of thing in this iMac, and the importance that's being assigned to it? That was a terrible sentence. The importance is being assigned to appearance. I mean, the iMac design is not new, but for some reason it seems to be refreshed a little bit in everybody's thinking with this new machine.
Yeah, I mean, it just seems a little bit cleaner. I think that it's super important, and I think that the new iMac is a good example of it. The visual standards have been upped, not just on the inside with the display, but I don't know, it just feels cleaner. Maybe it's just in my head because because of the better display. I don't know, but I can't wait to see one in the store and actually like look at it. I don't know.
Well, when that happens, you probably are going to then need to pull out your credit card.
Yeah. I probably won't bring my credit card to the store that day just to make sure that I don't bring one home on accident.
Don't bring your iPhone 6 either. You got the Apple Pay. That's how they're going to get you.
Yeah, that is very true. Good point.
Yeah.
I don't like leaving the house without my phone though. It makes me feel uncomfortable.
Yeah, you'll be thumbing the phone nervously as you look at the iMac, and all of a sudden you've bought it. So.
Yep. I'll let my thumb hover on the Touch ID a little bit too long, and that'll be it.
Yeah, exactly. Guys, we're running out of time, but I did want to just touch on Apple Pay. That's kicked off here this week, and just across the board in a couple sentences, I'm curious for your reactions. Have you tried it? Is it a good idea? Is this really the future of paying for things? Mike, how about you first?
I had I went ahead and downloaded 8.1 on. I was not expecting to be able to test out Apple Pay on the day of its release, because I wasn't expecting to have a phone that worked with it. I had a 5 and was fully expecting to stick with a 5, and I was surprised to learn that I was getting a 6 Plus, which I got last week. So I've been adjusting to my new, more cramped pockets and the size of the device. So that's been an interesting process, the first new form factor for me in a while. But I was particularly excited because I then knew that as soon as Apple Pay was ready, I would be able to use it. So I did indeed download 8.1. I tried to load a bunch of credit cards, discovered relatively quickly that one of the cards I could not load was my Amazon Chase Visa, which I thought was just a transient hiccup until I discovered that it was perhaps not so transient and possibly deliberate. But armed with at least one credit card, I ran downstairs to Duane Reade, the Walgreens New York brand and subsidiary, and walked right up to the counter and bought a bag of pistachios with my thumb. And it was essentially seamless. It was a very positive experience. I think what a lot of folks did not realize or didn't consciously realize is that everywhere they see those NFC-enabled checkout terminals where you can enter your PIN for a debit card, you can swipe your card, you can sign on the screen, and it has the blue transparent antenna over on the top of the checkout panel. Every single one of those is Apple Pay ready today. If it's
quite true.
Well, not quite true, except where they have turned it off on purpose. But most of them should be Apple Pay ready today. And Josh is pushing back on a specific instance or a specific retailer.
Well, actually, both. I went to a gas station around the corner that has NFC terminals. Did not work there. It acted like it was going to work, and then it was declined.
Oh.
And then apparently I've been hearing that Rite Aid is apparently specifically disabling it. So
That's correct.
yeah, so that icon is not a guarantee Apple Pay will work, which is something Apple needs to work on. They need to have some specific signage to let people know where they can use it.
Their perspective on it has basically been to say these are the launch retailers, these are the flagship retailers we're launching with, which is Whole Foods, McDonald's, and the Apple Store, and so forth. So I think they've been very conservative about the messaging about where it would work. And I did go to, essentially I went to Walgreens, so I was pretty confident it was going to work. But there have been, considering the complexity of a system like this, the fact that we're only hearing about a handful of systemic glitches, as in, specific credit cards that cannot be enabled, specific retailers that are not allowing it, even though by rights they should be able to use it, and a very small number of actual payment glitches, which is, I think, the Bank of America customers who may have been double charged, including one guy from CNN who unfortunately was double charged. So that's not cool. But that's being resolved. Given that we're 4 days in now, and that's the level of concern or pushback, and by and large, it really just works, I think that's remarkable. I don't think it's possible to overstate the complexity of launching something like this. There are a lot of moving parts. Every one of those payment transactions involves at least 4 entities: Apple's device, the card reader at the retailer and the retailer themselves, the card issuing bank, and the credit card processor, and the Visa, MasterCard, or Amex. That is a lot of dancers in this particular hoedown, and they all have to be going at the same speed, and they have to be dancing to the same tune. The fact that it works at all, I think that is, you point at that and you say that's Apple. Google Wallet, has never gotten. I don't think there were as many Google Wallet transactions in 2 or 3 years as there were Apple Pay transactions in 2 or 3 days.
That's a great point. That's a great point.
One thing I want to mention that I think everyone's ignored, because everyone focuses on the in-store aspect, going to Walgreens and getting your bottle of soda. People are not talking about using Apple Pay in-app.
Yep.
And they really should. And Apple should be pushing it because it's amazing. It's totally amazing. I downloaded the Target app. I found some paper towels because we needed paper towels. I checked out with Apple Pay. I don't have a Target account. Like within 2 minutes of downloading the app, I'd already given them $17 for paper towels, which seems a little absurd in hindsight. But but I mean that's amazing. And for retailers who are trying to compete with Amazon, who seems to have everyone's credit card on file, that's a huge competitive advantage. That puts everyone on a level paying field. So I think if Apple Pay is going to take off anywhere, there's a lot of roadblocks to using it in the real world. But I think in app, it's going to be game changing.
Yeah, I'll share that experience. I've been enjoying using it on my phone. Portland has, for the most part, not very many big box retailers inside the city limits. So my opportunities to use it on a day-to-day are, I wouldn't say, they're pretty slim. But using it in phone is just awesome.
Yeah, it's a great point.
And I guess when I first heard about this, if it worked, my reaction is, why would I not want to do this? Why would I not want to use my thumb instead of trying to punch in a code that somebody can be looking over my shoulder, or hand somebody a card that disappears for a few minutes while they go back and run it through the machine? Why would I not want to use my thumb to authenticate? It just seems like a no-brainer. And Mike, yeah. I'm with you. We've seen a few hiccups, and it would be impossible with something of this complexity not to see some hiccups. So I think it feels really good, and I hope the momentum keeps going, because I really think you look at all the NFC discussion that we've had over, I think, the last 2 iPhones, that Apple had to put something in, it didn't come, and there were some people that just said, oh, well, this, NFC is dead, and suddenly Apple does it, but they took the time, they've done it right, based on what we're seeing now, it works, and it works conveniently and consistently. And so I think it really can be a game changer.
Yeah, and 2 points just on exactly that topic. Number one, in a week where Staples announced support for Apple Pay, and also announced at the same time that they had a data breach that may have compromised credit card accounts, how much happier am I if I'm going to go into that store and pay for something with a tokenized credit card that I know is only, can't be used in any other context, I'm pretty happy about that. And number two, as I've been saying this for years, I know a lot of people have been saying it for years. When people would ask me, when is this Google Wallet thing, or when is this, contactless payments and NFC thing going to take off? Why isn't it seeing adoption? We have all these hardware manufacturers that are supporting it. All these retailers have put in these terminals. Nobody's using it. Why is it not getting any traction? And I said, when it's in the iPhone, you'll see it. And I guarantee you that the only 800-pound gorilla that can move that can move an industry like this is Apple. You cannot get all those Android manufacturers to dance to the same tune. And in fact, we've seen that specifically, many of them have turned off the NFC payment functionality in their own phones in favor of different schemes, barcode-based schemes or other payment schemes. So how on earth were you ever going to get that Google ecosystem to move in that direction when there are so many competing interests? Now you can see the outliers in the Apple Pay scenario, where there are specific retailers or specific card issuers who are pushing back and saying, we're not going to do this because it goes against our business interests. And they're obvious red flags because they're the only ones standing in the way of the tide, versus the Google Pay side, where so many of the players refused to participate, or participated at first and then withdrew their support. Apple is the only force that can drive innovation in something like this and do it at scale that's going to get the necessary momentum behind getting the new readers in the stores, getting the payment infrastructure there that needs to support it. And I think it's wonderful to see. It may be incredibly painful and a lot of work for a lot of people, but it's wonderful to see that, that there is still enough gravity around this platform to do something like this.
Sounds like you quoted Tim Cook there. Only Apple.
I mean, he's not wrong. He doesn't say it because it makes him feel better. He's really not wrong. There isn't another player that can do what Apple does. Still, even with people who are, and I met with an app developer recently that is just now introducing an Android version of their flagship app because it's possible for them to do it now. And I think that's going to become a more and more common story. But even with the relative market share in phones, even with the relative mind share of iOS versus Android, there's still only one finger on the lever. It's Apple's, and you cannot get everybody else to march in the same direction.
Agreed. Guys, this has been a really good discussion, and I think, in fact, we may have run just a little bit long on our usual target time, but I didn't want to break the band up, and we still didn't even touch on the no, everybody. But there's so many good points here, and we didn't even touch on the Mac Mini, so we'll have to touch on that in another episode. But I want to thank everybody for being here and for covering all the topics with so much wisdom and, of course, such good nature. Josh, great to see you. We'll be talking to you about the iOS 8 book soon, I hope.
Yeah. Looking forward to it, Chuck.
Great. Mike, always a pleasure. Come back anytime that you're not jetting off to San Francisco for conferences.
Thanks, Chuck. Always a pleasure to see you as well.
And Nat, it's great to have you here for the very first time. I hope this will not be the last. I hope you'll do it more often as well.
Yeah, I'd love to. Thanks so much for having me.
Great. Folks, definitely go to MacVoices.com. Check out our show notes. I'll have links in there to everybody's bio, everything they do, so you can follow them on Twitter or app.net or wherever they want to be followed. Check out their podcasts or their applications or their projects or whatever. They're all really interesting people, and they're helping drive the industry forward. I'm Chuck Joyner. This is the MacJury on MacVoices. Until the next time, and as always, thanks for watching. Visit MacVoices.com for links, show notes, to subscribe, to connect with Chuck on Twitter, Google+, Facebook, and LinkedIn. Subscribe to our weekly newsletter, the MacVoices Dispatch, to stay up to date on all the latest MacVoices news from our front page or at MacVoices.com/newsletter. Advertising and sponsorships handled by Backbeat Media at BackbeatMedia.com. Bandwidth provided by CashFly at CashFly.com.